Greetings from the frozen tundra of St. Louis, starting off the new calendar year. Happy New Year. My name is Dan Davis, President and co-founder of 80K Wealth Advisory Group. And as we sit at the beginning of the new year, I think it appropriate to look back at 2017 as well as to look forward to 2018 and beyond. So instead of rehashing things that you see on the news regularly, I thought it best to really focus on two areas. First is what I'll classify as the business cycle. Second is the market cycle. The reason why I thought those would be the two best is those really drive all the financial market returns, et cetera, which is what people really are most interested in, is we're really looking at the stock market and then the bond market. As we focus on the business cycle, William Emmons, PhD from the St. Louis Federal Reserve, recently spoke at the FPA in St. Louis, and he commented that the business cycle that we're experiencing is the third longest post-World War II in history. Also, he commented that when you take a look at sort of the last 10 expansions post-World War II, that this is one of the weakest expansions. So long but weak. So really what's driving it is a key question. When will it end? When it ends with a recession, will it be severe? Will it be mild? So when you take a look at really what's driving it, it gets down to central bank policies. Right now, post-financial crisis, you saw enormous, unprecedented stimulus from central banks around the globe, and we're seeing the economic benefit of that. When you take a look at The Economist, one of the best global magazines in print, it has a page towards the end that gives a summary of each country's economy. And when I take a glance at that, I haven't seen the kind of return numbers on GDP, both over the last 12 months and what they're projecting, since like 2005. So it's been a long time since we've seen the type of global expansion that's going on right now. I would categorize it as good, but not great. When you take a look at the numbers, it's not like China's growing at 9 or 10%. It's more like they're saying they're growing at 6.5%, and they're really probably growing at like 5%, because we all know China lies about their numbers. When you take a look at the U.S., growing at somewhere in that 2 to 3% range. And other things that we haven't seen the effects of yet, I'll call our fiscal policy, the effects of the new tax law, the possibility of infrastructure spending. Those are sort of things that are in play to affect the business cycle's continuation. When will it end? When will we see a recession, and will the recession be mild or will it be severe? The answer is really no one knows the answer to that. But if you take a look at William Emmons' speech that he gave to the FPA, he commented about 3 conditions that cause recessions. One would be that the cycle just overheats and expands so long that it naturally runs out of juice. We see some conditions present for that right now when we see how ultra low unemployment is compared to historical norms. However, when we take a look at things like inflation, whether it be wage inflation or just cost of living, we don't really see the effects of some of the things that you would normally see end of cycle. The other is like a shock. If you take a look at, say, for example, 1973, when the Nixon administration discontinued the Bretton Woods policy coming off the gold standard, a big shock. You take a look at the OPEC crisis in the late 70s, early 80s. Those kind of shocks are very difficult to predict, but they do create a real break in something. And so then does the break cause it to be mild, or does the break cause it to be severe? Really becomes an issue of, is it one thing or is there like a domino effect? So for example, if you take a look at the early 2000s, we saw the first domino was an overheated stock market, the internet bubble, if you will, followed by corporate corruption, followed by 9/11. So you had a series of dominoes that caused it to be very severe. Then on the other side, it's financial deterioration. So in the financial crisis that we saw in 2008 caused just total deterioration of the entire business cycle. Financial markets collapsed, the economies were in severe state. So when I take a look at what the risk of recession is for 2018, if I take a look at the economy overheating, because of the fiscal policy that's in place with the tax law change, as well as probable spending on things like infrastructure, I think that's not very likely in 18. But 2019, 2020, I would say it's imminent. When you take a look at shocks, it's just impossible to measure something like that. But to me, North Korea and a central bank misstep are the biggest risks on shock. I'm going to talk about the central bank possibility of a misstep later. And then the last would be financial deterioration. I think that very low risk as well. When I shift from business cycle to market cycle, I'll first start with equities. LPL's research team commented that we're in the second longest equity run post-World War II. The one that is longer than this was in the 90s. The drivers of this are very similar to what we talked about in the business cycle. The key things that I think are worthy of comment, one, is that international developed world and emerging markets both outperformed U.S. last year. First time in quite a while that that's happened. Second would be that when you look at history, small cap typically benefits the most from the types of tax rule changes that just occurred. So if I were going to then comment on volatility, last year was one of the record-breaking years for low volatility with upside market run. Historically, when you see years like that and you say, well, what happens the year after that? It's very normal that you see low double-digit returns after that. I think that there's high probability that we'll see normal volatility, that 5 to 20% type of pullback, that from peak to trough to peak is months, sometime over the next 12 to 18 months. I think the abnormal volatility that would be complete market collapse is very improbable in that time frame. If I were going to sort of wrap up 2018 looking forward, it really would be fundamentally, I think the growth on the equity should be 6 to 8%, but that animal spirit that we've seen historically in the market is just euphoric, and I think that could cause the returns to be low double digits. I would expect emerging markets to continue to outperform U.S., and I would expect small cap to outperform locally. When I shift inside of market cycle from equities to fixed income, the fixed income markets and the central bank policies are so married that the two will be intertwined. And so when we take a look at the fact that the Federal Reserve has raised rates in 2015, 2016, and 2017, but we really haven't seen interest rates go up, why is that? The biggest reason that I believe it is because the low rates throughout Europe and Japan have caused our rates to stay low in spite of the fact that the Fed's tried to push them up. And so I think it's worthwhile talking about central bank policies resulting from the financial crisis. Phase one is quantitative easing, printing money and using that printed money to buy bonds. Phase two is when they stop printing the money. Phase three is when they start taking some of that stimulus out. The Federal Reserve's calling that normalizing the balance sheet. So effective 2018, the Federal Reserve is in that third phase, whereas bonds mature, they're not going to have all of them reinvest. Let's put it in perspective. Before the crisis, the Fed's balance sheet was about $800 billion. Now it's approximately $4.5 trillion. My brain doesn't comprehend that either. But if you oversimplify it, we went from $1 trillion to $4.5 trillion. My brain can handle that math. And how much are they going to take off in 2018? Depending on whose math you use, somewhere between 200 and 400 billion is what's going to come off of the balance sheet in 2018. When I take a look at the ECB and the Bank of Japan, they're still in phase one, meaning they're still printing money and using that money to buy other bonds. The central bank in Europe has announced that it will go from 60 billion euros per month to 30 billion. So we can see that they're approaching the end of it. They have basically said that they'll do that 30 billion through the fall of 18. Take a look at the Bank of Japan, they're pretty much full tilt on how much they're doing. So the risk that I see is when the central banks are all over here in the third phase, reducing their balance sheets, the headwind that could have on interest rates, if you will, creeping up at a way that all of a sudden they start to move faster. But if I were going to summarize, the biggest risk I see, both for the fixed income market as well as for the economy and everything, it's a misstep from central banks. There's a lot of details on that we could talk about in our meetings, but I won't go into at this point for purposes of keeping the duration low. Our expectations on fixed income would basically be that they make more money than cash, but that it's low single digits. And the wild card is a potential misstep from any of the different central banks. Wrapping up in summary, I would say 2017 was awesome. 2018 we expect to be good. There's the risk of central bank misstep, things like North Korea, but the risk of recession I think is low. 2019, 2020, all cycles come to an end. And it's a mistake that people make that they say this time it's different. There are a lot of differences to this relative to the unprecedented amount of central bank stimulus, but the business cycle will hit a recession. The financial markets will come to an end of their bull run. Whether or not it will be mild or severe, those cards haven't played themselves out yet. We'll be very diligent in monitoring that for you. 2018, we wish you the most peace and good health. Probably a good point to comment. As you are all aware that I had cancer, that had surgery. Surgery went really well. Pretty much my life's back to normal. There's some internal healing that probably is done but not complete. That anyone that knows anything about prostate cancer knows the details of that. I'm still dealing with that. But in general, I feel great exercising regularly, and my 2018 resolution is to lose another 5 pounds through proper diet and exercising regularly. So I thank you all for your prayers. As I have been focused more on this next stage of life, one of the things that I'd like to do is ask you for your help. We will continue to want to grow the business, but last year I decided to quit with a lot of external marketing. The major reason to do that is to focus just on our existing clients instead of focusing on growing the business and servicing existing clients. So to the degree that you can help those of you who are satisfied, we'd like to bring 6 clients on this year from referrals from you. So when appropriate, direct them to our website, discoverindependence.com, have them like us on Facebook, but most importantly, ask if it would be appropriate for me to send them an email or give them a call, because if you have me follow up with them in a non-threatening way, that's the best way. So thank you very much for your trust, for the relationship that we've had. This month marks my 3rd decade in the business. I started as a college intern as I was studying finance in January of 1988. I don't feel that old, but it has been 30 years. Thank you very much for how you've helped our business grow and how we will grow together. Signing off from St. Louis.